We're going to just start with in what ways does Sam Shepard fit as a classic playwright? Since we are a classic company, why did we commit an entire season to his work?
For me at least, I think it's his role in the progress of American theater. I think the way that he exploded the typical American living room drama into being this expressionist thing and pretty much being one of the founding playwrights of American expressionism, kind of really rooted himself in why he's a classic playwright.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, as Dane mentioned, it's very much part of the American identity. I mean, the US is always sort of finding itself in comparison in a lot of ways to movements that came before it, especially in theater. So he's a modern playwright that made the United States identity more on a global stage and more on an accessible stage. So I think that's why.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think for me, what makes a classic playwright, right? Because we have to ask ourselves this all the time. I mean, we're making up a false category. Nobody declares themselves classic playwright, so we're busy doing the declaring a lot. I think a lot for us, it's about when a playwright feels like they have reinvented the playwriting form, either the American playwriting form, the global playwriting form, that they were part of a shift. And for me, O'Neill began the first major stage of integrating European expressionism into American playwriting. And then Tennessee Williams made it even more American, carrying on O'Neill's tradition of expressionism. And by expressionism, I mean, we could have a whole panel on that, but poetic staging, non-naturalistic staging that allows us into a character's experience rather than what reality literally looks like in the mirror. And then the legacy after Williams, I think, is sort of an interesting one to track. I mean, it kind of moves, for me anyway, it moves into Guare, Albee, and Shepard. They actually exist together, even though people often put those three playwrights in separate planes. Very much in the 70s, they're actually all experimenting together and actually in quite close proximity. So though they don't appear in books together, they're making work within blocks of each other, which is really easy to forget because they end up in different places in some ways. Shepard ends up, staying in East Village for a long time and going to San Francisco, while Guare and Albee will slowly make their way all the way up to Broadway. But Shepard does too. So anyway, I do think he helped helm the sort of next stage of contemporary expressionist American playwriting.
Those three especially, I feel like they, because of their contribution, have earned that kind of awesome status of being able to be a living classic playwright. I feel like a common definition is like a dead playwright, one of the past.
True.
But yeah.
It was interesting for me because when I was in college, a young director studying, avant-garde playwriting, you certainly did not include Shepard in that list. I was all about,
right,
the European expressionists, and Shepard was like, the fraternity dude who wanted to become an actor in Hollywood someday was super into Sam Shepard, and so I always put Shepard on a shelf over there, and I think that was a mistake. Honestly, I do think that that he was really formally inventive, and really really pushing the edges in the 70s. And honestly, until I got deeply into his biography, I didn't appreciate that. I didn't appreciate what obstacles he was up against when he started making work, because in some ways Shepard has, we treat him as a contemporary playwright, and so he seems less experimental in the 2000s than he did in 1975. So what themes inside of Shepard draw you the most, attract you the most? Not necessarily to your individual plays that you directed, but just in general, what makes you sit up when it comes to Shepard?
For me, the thing I like so much about Shepard in some of his work is the kind of the duality of humanity. How like there's an angel and a devil inside of us, or like a sense of order or chaos inside of us, especially in some of his sort of like more trippy peyote plays. Like the idea of the split self is really present, and that's something that really interests me. And the idea of like how the soul is sort of the wandering soul is also something that really connects with me. I know a lot of people. I know like Lane, you often talk about his family dramas. And for me, those have always been sort of secondary. I didn't find those until much later. I was in college reading Sam Shepard, I guess with the frat guys, and loving the poetry of it, you know, and loving like, you know, Savage Love and those early short pieces. I kind of didn't even know about some of the family plays until I was in left college and beyond.
Mm-hmm. So you said, I believe the word you just used was wanderer. Could you go deeper into that?
I mean, that you see that even in his more realistic plays, the idea of these characters who can't settle down, who feel, you know, unrooted to their lives in some way. And so there's a lot of long walks in Shepard, a lot of long drives, a lot of characters who are on the road, either literally or figuratively. So for me, that's something that I really like about his work and what draws me the most.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's the wandering soul image. There's something about that isolation that I think is great, and that's something that draws me to Beckett too. Is like, and who was a big influence on him, is that idea of isolation and alienation. And I think that actually came through in his that persona of that existential cowboy, that badass that he's known for. I think that's like, especially that time period's hyper masculine way of expressing those feelings. Like if he were around today, it would be less hyper masculine. But I don't know. Yeah, that alienation really resonates with me.
Yeah, let's put a pin in gender for just a second, and I want to come back to that. It's interesting. It's a testament to how diverse his pieces are in that. Yeah, I have different ends to it. I mean, mine are the family dramas, and I like the family dramas because of how much his expressionism and naturalism are integrated maturely in some of them. I am most attracted to the idea that, you know, right now in America, you know, I look out my window and I'm looking at, I don't know, 40 houses here in South Philly, and thinking that inside of each of those houses is a vibrant, crazy, specific life. An entire universe exists inside of one of those houses. And I love the idea that Shepard basically, you know, tears the walls off the house and lets us into the private life in a way that's really experiential, expressionistic, that's raw, that's true. And, you know, there's so many families. I mean, I think probably none of us don't have any of us don't have a connection to alcoholism or drug use or abuse or explosive, you know, psychological drama that's inside of our closed doors, you know, or whatever the craziness that is our individual family tables. Like each of our family tables are crazy.
No, but it's funny. It's like, I feel like my family did me a great disservice by being so supportive and loving, because there's a huge part of American drama that I'm just like, what? So.
Well, and so yeah, I appreciated that. I mean, that's why I was drawn to Curse. I also like, there's something about that keeps getting repeated in Shepard, this idea that we pass down familial, and he usually refers to it as familial viruses, and that we pass them down like DNA. And I'm really interested in that idea of that. That I do believe there's probably things that I share behaviorally and psychologically going back 4 or 5 generations, that it's really miraculous how much function and dysfunction get passed down through family. And that, you know, Shepard writes a lot. I mean, Vince's monologue, Driving the Car, is the most famous of looking in the mirror, but that we see echoes of ourselves going back generations and ahead generations, that he's conscious of living in this ongoing spectrum of life. And I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Any other aspects of Shepard that get you?
The language obviously is just really, really fun and really wonderful. Sort of the first thing that you sort of meet is this language that just feels great to say. I'm not an actor, and even I enjoy saying it, you know.
What about it? What allows it to do that in a way that other playwrights might not?
There's like that rock and roll rhythm inside of it, you know, like you can really, you know, just the way that he puts the words together and the sounds, it sort of just starts to like, it makes you want to move a little bit, you know, and it's just a really special, beautiful thing that he has. So
yeah, that rock and punk attitude is something that draws me as well. That and it's something a little bit more about his reputation rather than his work, but that kind of rule breaker aspect of like, yeah, I'm going to do theater. I'm going to do my theater. I think that's really attractive and very inspiring.
Cool. What drew you or attracts you, or in what ways do you connect to the plays that you directed this past season?
For me, Buried Child, that's one of those, I'll be totally honest, I read half of it in college and then spark noted the rest. But when I finally got through it this past, before we were going into the season, I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of what I'm going through myself. I was moving from, I was coming back from Chicago to take this position, and that kind of like, is the world going to look at me as a failure for coming back home? And even though that's not what was happening, I really resonated with Vince's kind of return home and his going away to distance himself from his roots, and then kind of, it's like gravity, what comes up must come down, and the return home and the ultimate implosion that happens, or the explosion that happens. I really resonated with that message and that character.
Brenna, what did you connect with in terms of Fool for Love?
Well, there's definitely that wandering soul element to the piece, which is something I enjoy, but also that the desire to be with someone or something that you know you shouldn't be, or that you know hurts you, and that you know is dangerous to you or destructive to you. Sort of that pull that can come in so many forms. For this one, it happens to be, a love, a relationship. So that for me felt really potent and really exciting.
In what ways is the father character, and how the father character plays out formally in the play, there and not there? How did you connect with that?
Well, sort of, he becomes the thing that, like, he is both the reason why they are connected, right? He is their father. He is the reason why they cannot be together, so he is their obstacle. He is sort of the person who kind of kept telling them, like, if things go bad, just run, just go. So that's sort of the way that they understand their life kind of comes through him. So in this piece, it's crazy though, because in Fool for Love we hear a lot about the mothers, but they're just not allowed to be present because sexism in American theater. But so it's sort of like he's gifted this very important place in their life because of the fiction of that particular play. So it's like, yes, he's very important because the play says he's important. And like, is there any other reason besides that? Well, no, that's the most important reason because the play says so,
Thank you. And for me, what drew me to Curse, as I said, was the idea of tearing off the walls. It was the idea of how much alcoholism can, or parental violence, danger, for lack of a better word, can create an entire solar system around this singular planet. How much power that father has because of his danger, and how that danger just keeps emanating rippling through the entire family multi-generationally, and even that it becomes, how much that abuse becomes almost happens on a sort of universal or global plane. It starts to affect literally the landscape of the world. And I love that balance between, it looks like a box set naturalist piece set in a kitchen, and yet it can breathe. It breathes way beyond that. It pushes against the envelope of that box set almost constantly. So I love that. I love the containment and the pressure against that containment. Dane and Brenna, how did your directorial perspective on the show, your directorial take on the show, do you think it may have realigned the way we experience the play than another production might?
I don't know how to answer that. I'll try. I know that our production of Fool for Love was generally run shorter than most productions of Fool for Love.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like their general runtime, we were shorter than that. And it's funny that the first time we ran the play, I was like, that's too short. That's too short. But I think that there is a certain lack of, I think that for us, we tried to really focus on essential, like what was essential in the moment. So there wasn't a lot of, I don't know, extra stuff. Like there wasn't a lot of like extra throwing her against the wall or sort of extra like shaking her, that I think is maybe present in a lot of other productions, which is what is adding to their runtime. I don't think I necessarily interpreted the play through any lens. I tried to just be very specific about what's in the text. But there's all these assumptions, right? Like there's the assumption that the father is an abusive father, but there is absolutely nothing in the text that indicates as such. Like nothing. Like we really went looking for it. Like, is there, what evidence is there besides him being absent? Is there a sense of, and there isn't anything, and like, sort of like there's the stereotype that the play is like really violent and physical, but there's only 2 mentions of physical contact in the stage directions. So it's like, what is lens and what is stereotype, and like, what is it, like, how do they all shake up? So I guess I didn't try to come in with a lens. So, but of course that's impossible. You absolutely come in with a lens. It's impossible to banish it. So that's my very unsatisfying answer for that.
Well, that's okay. I mean, am I summing it up right to say that in some ways you wanted to tear off all of the packaging that had come with this play over the years and get to what was literally on the page and try to address that page?
I guess so, because a lot of the trappings are like really bad. Like they're really dangerous. They're very sexist, and like, I don't want to make sexist work. It's very difficult to not make sexist work. So I'm not saying I succeed at it, but a lot of the trappings around his work, and especially that play, are both untrue and also not they're damaging. So
do you think there's more misogyny in productions of Shepard than is implied in the Shepard texts themselves?
Oh gosh, what a question. Well, let's say equal. Let's say there's an equal amount. Shepard has his stuff, and then every person who does it brings in their own lens or baggage or perceptions or desires or projections on the work. So you kind of get, it kind of starts to like reflect itself like a prism back and forth, maybe.
How do you feel about taking on Shepard's work, which you've done multiple times, given some of the gender politics that might be embedded in his texts?
I mean, if I didn't do work if I avoided all work that didn't have bad gender politics embedded inside the text, I don't know if I could work. You know what I mean? Especially, especially in classic theater. So, it's there. And you try your best to not perpetuate it, or in some ways, like, when they're old plays, I like to think of it almost like refurbishing an old chair. It's like, this fabric is rotten, but like, we'll put some new fabric on it and maybe, but with Shepard, he's not old like that. He doesn't need to be refurbished. So it's sort of like, I probably tend to avoid plays that have that more frequently, like necessarily. Like, I feel like our production of Fool for Love, like, I feel like May was kind of a real person, and that, maybe that's all you can kind of do, is just make sure that she's not cast super younger than him, which is very frequently done, that she's not screaming all the time, and that, you're not constantly throwing her against walls, and like, you hope that's enough.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brenna. That was a really pointed answer. I appreciate that. Dane, how did your directorial perspective, do you think, change the way that Buried Child was presented?
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 avenues to that question. One is, we decided not to go with, the stereotypical white Midwestern family, and we went with a family of people of color. And the other one is that I went a little more expressionist, especially at the end, than other productions have. And I didn't let it just be a play about incest. The incest aspect and the dead baby was all more, it was more of a symbolic, or like a nightmare representation of how Vince feels within the family. And so, yeah, I feel like it was just, there was a more nightmare aspect to it. So I know someone mentioned that it was a little bit more like a Twilight Zone episode, which I'll take. I love that.
How did having a non-all-white cast change the play? Why did you want to do that?
Honestly, I don't think it changed the play all that much. I thought why I wanted to do it is because, one, the casting. when you're in auditions. And, you know, we were very open when we went into auditions because we didn't want to fall into the trap of just doing white Shepard. And then once the casting became clear, it was clear who I wanted to work with. I mean, they were all brilliant, and I loved every single one of them. But I had also just come back from, right at the end of my time in Chicago, we had taken a clown show with my company to such a weird trip to a South Illinois town called Mount Carmel, and we were presented by theater makers John Clancy and Nancy Walsh, and we performed our clown show in a bowling alley and like once, and it was weird, and there 3 people showed up, and some guy at the bar told us to stop because the clown was freaking people out, and then John gave us this tour of the town, and he was giving us this history of Illinois, where Buried Child takes place. And Mount Carmel was actually one of the last sunset towns in that region, where people of color had to return to their homes before sundown, or the local law would not be responsible, and honestly would probably be the ones responsible for anything that happened. So that was just something that was really sticking in the back of my head as we were casting, that, oh, this is a very specific place in America for this story, for this American story. And I just thought I thought it was interesting to explore that specific region.
Great, thank you. I can't speak obviously as much about Curse of the Starving Class because it hasn't been seen yet. But for me, as I said, I'm leaning in a little bit more heavily into the expressionism, but giving myself purposely the restriction of what looks like a naturalistic set. Yeah, I want to make sure that the play rock and rolls, that it moves, that these people speak before they think is really important to me, that they're constantly on physical impulse that's translated into language, and that we feel, really strongly what it is for that. You know, the play starts with a teenager talking about what it feels like to lie in bed when his dad loses his temper on a drunken night, and that we really viscerally, physically, as an audience, experience that sensation within the entire theater throughout the play. So that's mine. It's a good pivot to Molly Joe's question over from Facebook. When you curate a season based on a playwright, do you see a production's POV, point of view, or other aspects connecting in intentional or unintentional ways? So I think what Molly Joe's getting at is like, are we just choosing 3 Shepard pieces, leaving it at that, and then we all go each of our ways, or are we discussing POV or approaches to those plays as we're putting the season together? And I think my answer, and you guys can certainly differ, is that it's a very quick, when we're in those final stages of season planning, it's a very quick back and forth. We're asking each other what we might know in terms of directorial perspective or how the play might be executed in that act of choosing. So right now we're deep in the season planning process, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We can't just choose scripts. We're choosing productions. We're very director-centered as a company, which I love. And so I'm not choosing Fool for Love. I'm choosing Brenna's Fool for Love. I'm not putting, and that's really important. Now, after that, we're all free to then go down whatever pathway our directing is going to take, and that may change over the course of months, but that we understand the 3 DNAs of the shows that we're choosing and how they might relate to each other. And I think this is true that we're certainly doing it right now. We're often talking about an underlying arc, so not just the arc of the playwright or the plays, but an arc of what we're doing directorially and how those choices connect to each other. Do you guys want to add perspective to that?
I think that's about right, that there's a lot of, that we begin the journey together and then we kind of like wish each other very good luck and, find each other again at the end, like in a great way, Yeah,
it seems accurate to me. I've only been here last year and so far this year, so that seems right on.
So I want to pivot to Shepard's sort of experimental roots. And for those of you who don't know, Shepard, started creating work in New York, in the East Village, actually at what would later become the Ontological Hysterical Theater of Richard Foreman's. He was in the basement level of that. So even for those of you who know St. Mark's, even worse than the main space, it's a basement space in St. Mark's. It would become actually quite a flourishing, important space in the 80s, 90s. And he was usually putting up work for like, literally $10. So he would write plays often in one night that he could afford to produce. Famously, I forget which piece this is. He stole the sawhorse and made the piece with just the sawhorse. Forget that play. It's a two-man play. And was really, really messing around with form. Audiences would fall in love with his work, and he was championed by David Smith, the very famous reviewer for The Village Voice, who without him, Shepard might not still be around because people were walking out of his work as well. It was not the usual fare, even in the East Village at the time. And then he later moved to San Francisco and enters what some people call the peyote phase, where him and Robert Woodruff would do peyote in the desert and contemplate their next project. And his plays were often produced in a church on the grounds of San Francisco State University, so not even in San Francisco itself. And then later, the Magic Theater in San Francisco started producing his work, and that sort of began to launch him. And then New York started sort of sucking him back in again at a higher level. As we're all directors who work in non-traditional stagings, or at least very open to non-traditional staging, in what ways do you think he changed the way that theater is made in America? And does his work still stretch that envelope of traditional making? Is he still an experimental playwright?
I don't know if you can be experimental from the past. I mean, like, once you've done it, the experiment is there. So it's like he was experimental. He can't continue to be experimental, like, so not in a weird way, but like, so yeah, I don't think he's experimental anymore because he already did that work, and that's great. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And changed a lot of the way that, especially, sort of like that sort of New York scene happened. So, and we are the inheritors of that in a lot of ways.
Do you deal with a playwright who is experimental in his day? Like, I don't know, do you deal with early O'Neill different from mainstream Tennessee Williams, knowing that it was really sort of cutting edge and pushing the envelope at its time of making? Or does it not matter? Does it just get recontextualized now?
For me, I don't know if it matters as much. I mean, if was like the Harry Ape a more experimental show in its day than like Streetcar Named Desire? That's a interesting question. I don't know. But I only know what they mean to me now and here, Mm-hmm. It's like the audience who is looking at it, my audience is like, they're not the audience from the past. They are very much, and I don't like when we lie to them, like when we try to make them pretend something is true that is not true.
Go on about that. What do you mean?
Well, that, like that this work, because it was experimental, that they should look at it in the same way that the audience who was originally sort of surprised by it should look at it, that they should lie to themselves about what they know, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with all of that. I think there's a way that directors can continue to make experimental productions of his work. I think they're good canvases for that. But I agree. I think the experiment is in the past. I don't think, I think there's definitely, the good thing about him is that it's an accessible seed for playwrights of now to continue the experiment in new and fresh ways.
Do you think that some of his lesser known works, his nonlinear works, let's call them, do you think some of them are still challenging to produce? How do you think about that set of plays?
I love those plays. I would like to do them, but it's funny. It's like, are they experimental? I don't know. Are they hard? Yeah. They're hard to listen to. They're hard to be in because there's nothing to hold on to, I love them, but.
Give an example.
Well, something like, let's look like sort of like the most accessible from that period. We'll go Savage Love is probably the easiest and most accessible from that time. And probably just because, like, honestly, in some ways, the title itself helps you contextualize what you're dealing with. But they're, you know, they're open, you know, they're open poems in a way. And so there isn't catharsis in them. There isn't really, like, all of the trappings of the well-made plays, you know, are gone. So, you know, they're like dreams.
Yeah, I want to surf on that. I mean, a lot of his plays aren't well-made plays. At what level is that okay? Was that purposeful? I mean, we don't know his intention. For me, I'm challenged by the fact that I know that in the first half of his career, he rarely would do a second draft, and was stubborn about it and wanted to write his plays extremely quickly and often not sober. And so when I take on a play that intrigues, or when I look at a play that intrigues me, like Angel City, La Turista, you know, two very challenging plays to create. I mean, the latter is difficult to create because of its issues about race, and it's, but the former, Angel City, challenging to create because it's just badly structured under any normal, you know, lens that you would use. So how do you guys deal with this issue of well-written, not well-written, or fragmented, or nonlinear?
For me, it's about cracking it open and at least trying to salvage some sort of POV out of it. You just fill in the blanks where there are blanks, and you hope that you've made something that's really captivating and somehow still true to the original intention of the fragmented bits of writing.
Brenna, what do you think about those sort of more, as you said, not well-made plays?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean that as a compliment, you know. I don't necessarily have much value for the quote unquote well-made plays. So I don't know, like, they just, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Like, they exist, and like you bring them to life in the way that they exist, just and like so any other piece.
At some level, you're seeing that lack of structure, for lack of a better word, as a potential opportunity, as a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way that a lot of classic work, when you're dealing with older plays that, you know, like have impossible stage directions in them, it's the same sort of, like, I think it's a similar conundrum. It's like, well, I don't have an ape, so how are we going to do this ending? You know, it's just as challenging of like, as like this beautiful open dream moment. What does it mean? You know, they feel more similar to me than different.
And I think there's also something to speak of too, of like, even if they're difficult to produce, even if they're difficult to like grasp, like a director's love of it is going to carry it to at least a somewhat successful landing, even if it's just for them. Like Angel City, I love Angel City, and I don't like, sure, I guess there are like some dramatic, we'll say, road bumps in that piece, but like, man, I see them as beautiful, like, birthmarks on that road. I think that is just such a cool show. I would love to do it. Yeah, and I can see it really clearly in my head. And it is because it is like, again, it's a nightmare, and it follows its own logic.
And I like to think about, plays that don't contain their own logic, or maybe even have fractured logic. I like to think that they expect the most out of a director. I think the director can often do their very best work on good directors. Like, I don't want to see a bad director or mediocre director take on Angel City. I want to see a really amazing director take on fractured plays. You know, the great European expressionist plays, they just dive off a cliff in the final 10 minutes. None of them end. You know, Strindberg doesn't end. Wedekind doesn't end. They just go poof into, you know, weirdo, you know, abstraction. But I'm really excited to see how great directors ground it, because in many ways our job is to ground text. And when you give us text that's poetic, often our act of grounding text is in opposition in a good way to the sort of non-grounded poetry of the text. And I like the energy that can result from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to spend we're just going to go for about 10 more minutes, everybody, and then we'll be totally open to Q&A for 10 minutes. I'm going to pivot subjects, but if you have questions about Shepard, start putting them up and we'll hit those questions, and you can put them into the Q&A box, or when we're finished, you can raise your hand. So we're in the process of planning for a very unconventional season in which all the theaters are going to have to reconsider how we make and perform work over the next year, minimum. So I've asked myself the question, I want to ask you both, and ask myself publicly, what aspects of theater making matter to you the most right now, right? Because we could choose, a lot of theaters are going to need to choose simply to not make work for a period of time. We're not taking that path, we're going to make work. So why press against this social distancing and make work right now? What about theater feels the most important to you, and how are you thinking about making work over the next year?
I think we need art, and we need to be totally honest, we need to get out. But we also need to consider the safety of it. And I think the things that are important right now are, in such a vulnerable time, being authentic, being honest, being true, being compassionate. And how does that affect the hospitality of a production? And how do you invite an audience into a very safe, very comfortable, very open place where all of these emotions that they've been feeling these past couple of months can really just sit and bloom with each other?
You, Brenna, what aspects of theater making matter to you the most right now that you're doubling down on?
Well, it's funny. Theater has the opportunity, the possibility of being in some ways the most responsive of art forms. If we want to, we can choose to be very, very much living in the moment of what's around us in a way that, some other art forms might not. We don't always take that road, but we can. So I think something about this current time, making art right now, feels like that it's like almost impossible not to be very responsive to the immediate world around you. Mm-hmm. That it's like your plans from 5 years ago about what you were going to do this season are no longer applicable, and shouldn't be applicable, and you shouldn't try to hold on to them. So I think for me, that's something that's particularly exciting and provocative about this making art right now.
This may be an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it because it might not be obvious to everybody. Why can theater be more responsive than other art forms?
It should be more responsive than other art forms because it is the main mode of communication is the living human body. Mm-hmm. It's literally alive. I mean, we can move into like, what does liveness mean, which we could talk about all day. So that's, for me, I don't really mind I don't have a problem with people making work digitally online right now. I'm making work digitally online now. I don't feel like it feels any less like theater. The other night when I was with, some of my collaborators, and we were, had all of our mics on, and like we were testing out different audio experiments, it felt just like being in rehearsal, even though we weren't together necessarily, weren't able to do our, the warm-ups that we normally do. That moment was very live, So I think that online and digital theater is, for me, still feeling like theater. Not necessarily the archival things, which have their own importance. Like, it's been nice to be able to see some productions that I don't live in Germany. So like, I can now see these things that I wouldn't have been able to see. So I appreciate that, but that's not quite the same as like making work right now.
Is there something that you, in your head, use to distinguish theater and video art?
No, not yet. I mean, I think I'd rather keep the boundaries of what theater means pretty fluid rather than not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I like that you said about getting out, Dane, that, pure and simple, we want events. We're event hungry. We're really excited about a restaurant that will cater a meal that we can pick up in a box, at the sidewalk. Feels very exciting to us right now. And so within the boundaries of health and safety, can we create going out events that feel special? And I'm really into the eventness of theater. I'm really into the fact that for any of us to commit to a night of theater is a big deal. It can require, getting cars and babysitters and, you know, figuring out where you're going to eat. And, you know, it really adds up to a half a day. And I like that. I like that theater requires a commitment. And so I want to really try to, in exchange as a director, to commit back to that commitment and go, I'm going to create something really meaningful within the restrictions of social distancing for you to come out for. And that's exciting. I like the restrictions of social distancing. I'm really into something called radical hospitality, in which we really go out of our way to interface personally with an audience member in the act of theater making. And I like that I don't have to make the economic argument that, oh, come on, Lane, this show could normally seat 120 people and you're going to make a show for 15? Like, now I get to make a show for 15. And I find that really exciting, actually. So in some ways, I feel like it's getting me to commit more to radical hospitality. I like the idea of authenticity, that we need to really, any falsity, any belief that we're putting up theater for us or for the sake of putting up theater, or that our theater is so important that it can't go away, we have to let go of. I think in this much more intimate experience of theater, we'll be able to smell that and it will just feel dishonest. So I think we have to really approach it with an authentic, I wanted to invite you here at this moment, whether it be via Zoom, which is also very personal, and here on the computer. And as we know, it takes time commitment as well. Or it's somewhere out in the world live in small configurations. Tough last question. Do you think that the current conditions will realign American theater at all?
I hope so.
Just go. In what way?
I think, I mean, honestly, this is gonna sound really lame, but like, I hope that like we never go back to smushing audience members into tiny seats and like causing them to be in great discomfort and plunging them in darkness and telling them to shut up and not use the bathroom until we say so. Like, if nothing else, like, I think that we've been terrible to our audiences in what we make them do. And like, you know, I'm a pretty tall person, you know, and like, I don't know why we've been doing that to them. I mean, I know why, money, but like, I hope coming out of this that we kind of like treat them better physically in the space than we have been. And I'm not talking about, you know, like old theaters are old theaters, but moving forward, let's just not do that anymore.
Well, to the theater point, I even had I remember a professor during undergrad she offhandedly made a comment that she was disappointed that, this is going to sound crazy, that theaters didn't burn down anymore, referring to when like the floor lights or the footlights were made of like actual fire, and because they would burn down, you'd rebuild them and you'd revive them and improve upon them. And we haven't been doing that for a long time, and theaters have kind of gotten stagnant in their mode. And I agree. I feel like this could potentially be the burn down that's needed for this new, beautiful theater phoenix to come out and redefine the art form.
In what ways does the experience of being at the theater change if your comfort and consideration is taken into consideration?
I mean, I don't think we need to give them armchairs. It's not like I don't want to put them in a place of like stasis. I don't mind if the seats are hard. I just literally they need to have more room. Like, and if nothing else, like just give them a little bit more room. But because I think, you know, a lot of theater, we ask the audience to pretend they're not there. Like, not to be weird, but it's been really funny for me to hear people really be like, our audience, we miss our audience. I'm like, well, then why are you hiding them all the time? Like, what are you missing? Like, you do everything you possibly can to like make it feel like they're not there. So it's like, what are you talking about? So.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah, I feel a little like unloved, and that the art isn't for me when I'm treated badly in terms of seats and I'm super uncomfortable. I'm like, well, this is clearly about you. Because if it's about me receiving your show, then clearly thinking about me is important. And, you know, I've been to shows where it's a sizable ticket price, and I'm with folding chairs that are literally touching each other, and, you know, which leads to this. And I'm like, that's not okay. That's not, yeah. And then I feel like the rest of the show that's made, that all the other choices I'm visually seeing in front of me aren't really for me either. When I'm like that. And I know that, you know, I'm I'm a little famous within our own little EgoPo family. There must be a fist between every chair, and I'll go in and I'll check in and put my hand there.
You know, it's like, and it's funny. It's like I forgive it immediately when somebody invites me into like an interesting found space that I'm like, I'm gonna sweat, and I'm worth it. I'm like, I think it's okay. It really is just sort of like the traditional theater setup, like that. I'm, like I love going into spaces. I'm like, oh, this feels a little unsafe, like, so like it's I don't want to make this about economics, because it's not about like, I don't want you to only do theater if you can afford to get me like a plush chair. It's more that it's really just about the spacing.
No, I like the adventure aspect, because that does feel compassionate and authentic, and a gift.
Yeah. So it sounds like audience focus, like more attention on audience in general, sounds like a potential change.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, and I push that to radical hospitality and sort of non-traditional experiences of theater, which have been around forever and ever and ever. But I think we're going to I think you're going to suddenly see in the next 6 to 9 months a flurry of experimentation of what a house is, where the audience sits. And I think that's cool. And I think just keeps making theater about an event.
Yeah, and I'm excited about that. Like, I'm excited to see like what my fellow artists are gonna do. I'm excited about what they're doing now. Some of the crazy things people are talking about, like, well, maybe I'll try this. I can't wait. Like, do that. I'm also like really excited for the artists who are like, I'm gonna wait for a minute and really think deeply about that. Like, that's great too. Like, so I'm just really excited.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy shakeup.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I'm going to hit some questions that we have. And so we're now going to shift to the question era. Thank you guys for all of your thoughts. I know you'll keep giving us more. Brian Gensel, so you can use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand if you allow us to let your voice come on live. Brian says, when Curse is finally performed, what do you think the production will be able to offer an audience coming out of quarantine? More generally, what role can family drama serve for us in this time? The family drama part's the easier question for me to answer. We are trapped inside of families right now. We are so trapped. And just to have a little bit of breath and release of what's going on in our bodies being trapped, and seeing that on stage. And, Curse is about a family that really is very trapped within their walls. And so I think that's going to feel really vital, and like, oh yeah, it's a little obvious. In terms of just what Curse in general, mostly it's about that. It's about the pressurization and the enclosure. There is this idea about this familial virus, that like there's a virus out there, but there's also like there's viruses that we're fostering in our own families within quarantine, and to be able to question and see those, because if you can see the function and dysfunction within your family unit, whatever that means, you have the power to change. And in Curse, they don't have the power to change because they're unable to see it. They look for it, but they can't actually see it. So, and hopefully, what we're really going to do, I want there to be a sense of breath in the production, that, I'm not going to stage it until it is completely green lit, that it is okay to put a traditional audience into the seats. And so I want there to be a real vibrancy. I want it to feel like it's exciting to finally be there. Steve says, Lane, can you talk about your production in which the audiences were laying down on mats? Yeah, briefly, I guess. So that's Company. It's a Beckett piece in which we converted it from being a radio show on NPR into a live show. I know a lot of our audiences have seen it. The audiences are blindfolded. They lay down on their mats, and the text is both whispered in their ears by what we call an angel. So about half the text is within inches of their ears. And then the rest of the text is by 3 or 4 other characters who are further from the space in different topography to the listener. So some voices come from over there, some come from over there. And it's the voices in a man's head lying on his back in the dark, slowly dying or slowly going to sleep. You don't know for sure. And the audience is also gently touched. There's these memories. The old man has memories of his life as he slowly dies. And we're viscerally bringing the audience into these memories. So it's sort of part body work, part theater piece, part radio play at the same time. And audiences are blindfolded the entire time. And at the very end, they take off their blindfolds. They meet the angel who's been next to them and have cookies and milk with them because it's a sort of dark bedtime story. So that's Company, completely not okay to do in time of social the worst social distancing piece ever made. Joel says, Interact has been putting Shakespeare on Zoom and depending on the cast quite successfully, in my opinion. Can EgoPo consider doing the same? Also, Brenna, where did you acquire such a beautiful backdrop?
Real fast, this is actually from Anna Karenina.
Oh.
I live with an actor, and so basically I live now in a backstage of a studio because all he's doing is rehearsing and making pieces, and so instead of his black background, I threw up my Anna tapestry. So quick answer for that.
I like it. I like it. EgoPo reference in the Zoom. And as far as Zoom goes, I purposely have been, I spent a lot of time on Zoom like this. I mean, I teach a lot and I'm in a lot of Zoom. And so I personally didn't want to go Zoom theater. For me, Zoom teaching, Zoom lectures, and Zoom seminars like this feel really great. It's a great form. Like, it'd be very hard to say, let's go out to Drexel at 10 a.m. and meet these 3 directors and we'll sit at a table and talk to you from a distance. I actually think this is a really exciting format for seminars. And so I think, you know, as the 3 of us talked along with Katrina, we really wanted to do things that we thought would be, the opportunity gives us a chance to try them out and that they would be viable even when there wasn't social distancing. And Zoom readings of things don't feel for me, you know, for me personally, as vital and relevant when the quarantine's not there, as opposed to us putting our energies into how can we make personalized theater, in-person theater right now. And so all of our energies are there and in this educational sphere. And those are really important to us. And we've had really great results doing our masterclass acting classes online have been fantastic. And so, yeah, it's just a choice of where to put energies. I don't know if you guys want to address that at all, doing theater on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really...
that, Brenna, from what you're doing online as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great time to be like, it's like sort of like everyone has to sort of look at their missions, either as a company or as a human being. So like, I think the Lanterns Shakespeare Zooms are great because like, that's perfect for their mission and for their audiences. They are wonderful. And I know they're going to keep doing them. And I think that's great. Versus like somebody like 1812, like those amazing, like hilarious movie poster recreations they were doing with people from their homes. Amazing. I love them. Perfect for their mission and their audience. I don't know if EgoPo audiences want to see hilarious recreations of movies. Probably not. They want to. So it's like, it's nice to sort of get personal about what kind of art you make and for whom you're making it for. So as a short answer, so like, it's like, just, you know, it's just whatever feels the most appropriate and honest for you right now.
Thanks, Brenna. That's a really generous answer. Susan says, Lane has mentioned radical hospitality several times. Can you give a definition of the phrase and tell where it comes from? I actually don't know where it comes from. I need to Google it. I don't know. I started using it 10 years ago, and I actually don't know who invented it. For me, radical hospitality, and by the idea of radical, it just means taking hospitality to its next level, going to really excessive lengths to personalize the hosting of a person. So radical hospitality could refer to a dinner party where I really go to all lengths and I create, like, I don't know, I want a pond out in front of my front door and create stepping stones that are candle lit for you to enter across a pond into my house. And inside I have tree branches and you have to walk through a cave. None of that is actually necessary for the actual event, which is the dinner party. We're going to eventually sit at a table and have a dinner party. But radical hospitality means I think about the envelope outside of the literal event itself. On Thursday night, I showed a chart about from Richard Schechner about drama being the inner circle of concentric circles, theater being out here, and performance being out here. Theater is that idea of that crossing that stone path on the water. It's the drama is the dinner party. The theater is all of the trappings in the house and the experience around the dinner party. Personalized wine glasses, personalized wine. Each person gets their own varietal that I match to their personality. I don't know. It's excessive personalization, and it's dealing with the theater circle. And then dealing with the next circle out, which is called the performance circle. And that performance circle is everything before they came to that party. So radical hospitality includes, what did I do with my invitations? How did I drop off the invitation? How did I communicate with them before they came to the dinner party? And then obviously translate everything I just said into theater, and you get the idea of radical hospitality. So really personalizing, customizing the audience experience from the time they hear about the show all the way to the beginning of the drama itself. Charlie says, what are some of the things about this current environment and these platforms that do excite you as theater makers?
It feels like a performance dare, which is like an exciting way to just, I don't know, expand and grow. I think it's it feels like a fun challenge. And obviously the circumstances surrounding it are not fun. But it definitely feels like a new territory to explore, a big adventure.
Mm-hmm. For me, one of the things I like most about making theater and making work is I like building worlds. If that makes sense. Like I like making worlds that have their own rules and their own environments and feels. And a lot of, even before the pandemic, there were ways I was looking at how online experiences can expand and continue those worlds. So for me, like that is that I can still build worlds right now, which is really fun for me. I mean, we're still very much experimenting, but the piece I made, we made it like a couple weeks after we made it in early April. So we're like, it's funny because we're way better at Zoom now than we were then. But we used TikTok and Messenger and Zoom and all, like any sort of platform we could figure out to that we could embed in a single site. We tried to use just to see what worked, and it was really fun. It's like you sort of end up with this sort of beautiful collage of platform experiences, and that excites me. Like that we can mix and match things together, pre-recorded things and live things and objects, and like, you know, that we can make theater feel much more multi-genre, like experience. So that is something that I'm excited about.
There's also something too about using all of those different platforms that feels very present and of this time. And
I like that, Brenna, you're talking about not just you're going to explore new platforms, but the idea of going multi-platform, that theater can exist on multiple planes concurrently is really interesting, that you've been experimenting with. Mm-hmm. You were actually already doing online performance modes before you were prescient, I guess. Does it feel like just a continuation of the online work you've been doing? Has it changed or re-energized in any way?
Yeah, it definitely, you know, like I have made digital pieces before, and have been using like live streaming characters into live performances. So like those are things that like I was already working with because I was curious about them. But then when the pandemic hit, I was supposed to make a piece for Miami, and like all of a sudden, you know, like everybody else, all my work got canceled. And so the desire to sort of like pick up this piece that had been on the back burner that suddenly felt like it could really exist on an online platform just sort of happened. It was like, oh, well, we'll do this beautiful piece that we've always been thinking about, but never was like, we never had the time or the place to do it. Suddenly felt like, well, let's do it now online. Like, so it kind of just, it was just ready. I don't know.
And I'm personally, you know, excited about I don't know if platform is the right word, but different live platforms, different whole entire different ways of audience and performer to interact in the world live. And that excites me. And they were always there. It's just forcing me to consider things that my producer self was unconsciously going, no, I shouldn't do that. So I'm actually picking up hosts of scripts and writings and that I normally would never have pulled off the shelf because my producer self would have gone, you know, too small, too intimate, or I don't know. That suddenly they're brought to the forefront, and that's exciting. I do love it as a monologue teaching platform. I find very exciting, and honestly, meetings like this, it just, you know, the fact that you don't have to travel to do this is great, and I think I'll keep that.
And I love being able to collaborate with, like, I was able to work with my last digital piece with 2 actors who went to grad school. Like, you know, like they're not here anymore, but I still got to work with them. That was really lovely.
So I'll end with these. I got 2 questions here. If somebody, we probably have time for 1 hand raised question if somebody wants to, no pressure. Michael Hode with a fan note for Brenna, which is Brenna's digital diecast totally sucked me in, truly amazing. To your earlier comments, 2019 feels like a century ago, smushed into small spaces, pretending not to be there. So true. Really want to see what's honest, true, and creative things come out of this crisis. Thank you, Michael. We'll do our best. Yeah, so let's just sum up in case there's not another question or a hand raise. Yeah, so coming out of this, heading forward into the next 5 months particularly, so through to the new year, what's one thought that's going to keep driving you forward as directors, as artists?
It's a phrase I learned in dance improvisation, and it's shift, develop, transform. And I think this is a beautiful transformation period. So be open to the transformation that's going to happen. It's exciting.
To make sure that, like, curiosity is what's, like, driving me, but also to be very aware that, like, we have the opportunity to get rid of some of the aspects of theater that are really bad. So, like, can we get rid of some of the work that and some of the process that is really classist, really racist, really sexist? Like, is this a great time to sort of pull out those elements, or try to really focus on at least not bringing them back, right? Like, it's going to take effort to bring things back. So, like, let's not put the effort into that. And also, like, being really mindful that, like, there's an element of classism that's really going to sneak into this digital world if we're not careful, like, and about who has the best equipment, and suddenly, like, that's who's going to, you know, make it. So I've been putting a lot of thought into that. Like, how do we not just make this sort of a we arms race, you know?
Thanks for broaching that. I appreciate that. For me to try to approach my work and process with an open heart and gratitude, I think is going to be my mantra. I'm much more grateful for the existence of audiences than I allowed myself to be before, and I want to continue being appreciative of audiences coming to our dinner parties. So thank you both very, very much, Dane and Brenna, for joining us this morning. Thank you to all of the audience here on the webinar and out on Facebook for joining us throughout the entire 7 weeks of this process. Know that if any of you are interested in the online master teaching, just email producer@egopo.org, and we're collecting basically a wait list for our next masterclass. So if you want to be high up on that list, feel free to drop that email. And a reminder of what Dane said in the beginning, that this isn't cost-free for us to produce, and we are trying very hard to close our funding gap from this season caused by the postponement of the shows. So if you're able to make a donation, suggest a donation of $15. You can do that through the link that Dane posted, and you can just go to the website and do it as well. Thank you, everybody. See you on the flip side.